In a bustling African city, where the streets never truly sleep, and the hum of life carries on day and night, there lived a family that many would have called ordinary. But for those who knew them closely, they were far from ordinary. The father, a man named Chike, was known in his community as someone dependable, a man whose word carried weight. He wasn't rich, no, not by any means, but he was respected. His strength wasn't in the size of his pocket, but in his calm nature, his ability to endure hardship without complaint. Beside him was Ada, his wife, a woman who carried laughter in her voice and light in her eyes. Ada's smile could soften the hardest of days, and her spirit made the modest house they lived in feel like a palace. The children adored her, and the neighbors admired her for her kindness. Their 3 kids, 2 boys, and a little girl, gave their home the sound of running feet, of giggles, of bickering siblings who always made up before bedtime. Yes, the family didn't have much, but they had each other, and that was enough. Or so it seemed. You see, the real struggles of African families often don't announce themselves loudly at first. They creep in quietly, like a small crack on a wall, easy to ignore, easy to pretend it's nothing. But left alone, that crack can spread, widen, and before long it threatens the whole foundation. For Chike, the crack came in the form of a loan. It wasn't large, at least, not in the beginning, just enough to cover a business opportunity that someone he trusted had sworn was a sure deal. The kind of deal that could change things, just a little, for his family. Perhaps he could finally replace the old fridge that groaned every night. Perhaps he could make sure school fees didn't always come like a thief in the night, stealing their peace every new turn. But here's the thing: Chike didn't tell Ada about the loan. He told himself it wasn't necessary. Why burden her with worrying? Why drag her into a matter he could handle himself? After all, wasn't he the man of the house? Wasn't it his duty to carry the weight so that his family didn't have to? So he signed the papers quietly. He'd promised himself that it was temporary, that before Ada even noticed, he would have paid it off and maybe even surprised her with a little extra in his hand. At first, nothing seemed wrong. The family carried on as usual. Ada hummed as she cooked in the evenings. The children played outside until the street lights flickered on, and Chike came home tired but steady, as he always did. No one suspected anything. But loans, loans are tricky things. One missed payment doesn't seem like much, but soon it becomes 2. Then there are late fees, then interest that grows like a weed in the rainy season. And the more it grows, the harder it is to pull out. Chike kept telling himself it was fine. He was just about to catch up. He was just one payment away from setting things right. But every time he thought he was close, something else came up. School fees, hospital bills when the youngest fell sick, the leaking roof that the landlord insisted was his responsibility. Life in the city never paused for anyone's plans. And so the silence in their home began. It wasn't the sweet silence of rest after a long day. It was heavy. It was the silence of a secret, waiting to be discovered. Ada, ever perceptive, began to notice it. Her husband, once steady and talkative, had grown distracted. His smiles didn't always reach his eyes. At night, when she asked him simple questions, his answers were clipped, tired, as though his mind was somewhere else. Still, she trusted him. She believed, whatever it was, they would face it together because that's what families do. What she didn't know was that her husband was carrying a burden he thought he had to bear alone. And so, a small loan, a small debt, nothing extraordinary, nothing unusual, planted itself at the center of a family's life. And slowly, quietly, it began to grow roots. The truth, when it finally arrived, didn't come with the drama of thunder or the noise of drums. No, it came quietly, like a whisper that grows louder until you can no longer ignore it. It came in the form of a letter, white, official looking, with bold black letters that seemed to carry the weight of a storm. Ada was the one who found it. She had gone to check the mailbox, expecting the usual, maybe a water bill, maybe one of those church flyers that always promised your miracle is one prayer away. Instead, her hands trembled as she held the envelope. Her name and her husband's printed neatly on the front. She opened it. She read the words once, then again, as though her eyes had betrayed her the first time. The color drained from her face. Her steady hands suddenly felt weak. What she was holding wasn't just paper, it was a revelation, a confession written in ink. When Chike came home that evening, tired and dusty from a long day, he knew at once. He didn't need to be told. The letter sat on the table, open, waiting. Ada didn't greet him with her usual smile. Instead, her eyes, usually warm, were clouded, stormy. "Chike," she said softly, but there was nothing soft in her tone. "What is this?" The confrontation wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind of shouting match neighbors would gather to listen to over the fence. No, it was worse. It was the quiet kind, the kind where every word landed heavy, like a stone thrown into still water. "You should have told me," Ada whispered, her voice breaking. "We are supposed to be a team. Why did you carry this alone?" Chike tried to explain. He said he didn't want to worry her. He said he thought he could manage it, that it was just a small loan, that he was close to paying it off. But Ada, her eyes glistening, shook her head. It wasn't about the money anymore, it was about trust. From that day, the air in their home changed. Where there had been laughter, there was now silence. Where there had been lightness, there was now a heaviness that clung to every wall, every chair, every plate of food. The children, though young, could sense it. They learned it quickly to keep their voices low, to tiptoe around the storm they didn't fully understand. And the debt, that little debt that was supposed to be a stepping stone, revealed its true face. It wasn't small anymore. The interest rates were merciless. The loan that was once manageable had turned into something monstrous. To pay off one lender, Chike borrowed from another. To cover one hole, he dug another. The cycle spun faster and faster, and there seemed to be no way out. Soon, the family began selling things. First, it was the new television, the one the children loved for cartoons every Saturday morning. Then it was the good sofa, replaced with something smaller, less comfortable. Piece by piece, memory by memory, their home began to empty. The neighbors noticed. Of course they did. Neighbors always notice. Whispers started. Some said Chike must have joined bad company. Others claimed Ada was spending too much. Gossip spread faster than fire on harmattan grass. But inside that house, the real pain wasn't the missing furniture or the whispers from outside. It was the way Chike and Ada were changing. Chike, once steady and dependable, now carried a look of constant worrying, like a man chased by his own shadow. Ada, whose smile once lit up their world, now wore a face marked with lines of stress. Their voices, once full of laughter and warmth, now cracked with tension, with arguments spoken in hushed tones behind closed doors. The children adjusted, as children often do. They stopped asking for little luxuries. No more sweets, no more new shoes, no more trips to the small amusement park down the street. They learned to say, "It's okay, Mama," even when it wasn't. They learned the art of silence, the art of hiding their own needs so as not to add to the burden. And the family grew isolated. They stopped visiting relatives, too ashamed to explain. They avoided friends, afraid of the questions. The house that was once a place of laughter and late-night stories became a prison of unspoken words, a vacuum where hope seemed to shrink with every passing day. A small debt, they thought, just a small loan. But now it was a monster, a shadow hanging over them. And worse still, it wasn't only their finances at risk, it was the very bond of trust, the very fabric of their family. If the silence and shame were already heavy, The storm that followed was far worse. The creditors were no longer content with letters and phone calls. No, they wanted more. They wanted their money, and they wanted it now. The phone began to ring at all hours of the day. Sometimes it was early in the morning, before Chike even left for work. Sometimes it was late at night, when the children were asleep and the house should have been resting. The calls were never kind. Voices barked through the line, demanding, threatening, sometimes mocking. Ada would flinch whenever the phone rang, her heart racing, even though she wasn't the one who owed the money. Then there were the visits. Men in dark clothes, faces stern and unyielding, started appearing at their gate. They knocked loudly, sometimes pounded, their presence heavy with menace. The neighbors noticed, of course, they always notice. Children whispered. Adults stared. Gossip doubled. The family's shame was now public. One evening, 3 men came. They weren't violent, but their words cut deeper than any blade. They stood at the doorway, refusing to leave until Chike came out. Ada stood behind him, clutching her wrapper tightly around her, her face pale with fear. The men spoke of deadlines, of consequences, of what would happen if the debt wasn't cleared. Their voices were calm, but their eyes carried the weight of danger. Chike promised them again that he would pay. He spoke with a trembling voice but with all the dignity he could muster. They left eventually, but the scar they left behind in that household was deep. That night, the air was thick, too heavy to breathe. It was then that the argument erupted. Not the quiet, controlled exchanges of before. No, this was different. This was raw, loud, and devastating. The children heard it from their rooms. Words flew like knives. Ada's voice, usually tender, now cracked with anger and hurt. Chike, pushed to his breaking point, raised his voice too, not out of pride, but out of despair. At one moment, in the heat of frustration, Chike said the words no one expected. Maybe it would be better if I left. Maybe you and the children would be safer without me dragging you down. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that refused to die. Ada's face twisted with pain. Leave, she cried, her voice trembling. And do what? Abandon us? After all this? You think we only needed you when things were easy? Her voice broke, and tears flowed freely. No, Chike, you cannot leave. We are in this together. Even if it destroys us, we face it together. The children, huddled in their room, clung to each other. Their parents' voices, once the sound of safety, now felt like thunder threatening to tear their little world apart. It was their lowest point. A family that once had nothing but love and unity now stood on the edge of collapse, torn apart not by illness, not by tragedy, but by something as ordinary, as common, as debt. But life, in its strange way, sometimes sends help when it is least expected. A family friend, visiting from another neighborhood, had overheard one of the creditor visits. The story traveled, as stories often do, until it reached the ears of Ada's elder brother, an uncle who had been living abroad for years. He hadn't spoken much with them recently, distance having done what distance usually does. But when he heard, he didn't lecture, he didn't blame, he didn't judge. Instead, he sent money. Not enough to clear everything, no, that would have been too easy, but enough to silence the loudest creditor, the one who was knocking on the door the hardest. Enough to give the family breathing space. When the transfer arrived, Ada wept. Not just tears of relief, but tears of release, as though a heavy chain had been loosened from around her neck. For the first time in months, Chike lifted his head without shame. The children saw their parents embrace, really embrace, for the first time in what felt like forever. The debt wasn't gone. The struggle wasn't over. But the lifeline had been thrown, and for a family drowning in despair, that lifeline meant everything. That night, for the first time in many weeks, they sat together as a family. They didn't have much for dinner, just rice with a thin stew, but it tasted like a feast. It tasted like hope. The road ahead was still long, but they knew now that they were not alone. And sometimes, knowing you are not alone is the first step toward climbing out of the pit. The uncle's help didn't erase the problem completely, but it did something just as important. It gave the family a chance to breathe. For the first time in months, they weren't living under the immediate shadow of threats and pounding fists at the gate. That small window of relief opened their eyes to something they had almost forgotten: unity. One Sunday afternoon, after church, they gathered in the sitting room. No television, no distractions, just the family. Chike had cleared his throat, his voice heavy but steady. "We need to talk," he said. And this time, unlike before, he didn't keep anything hidden. He laid it all out: the loans, the interests, the total amount owed. Nothing was left in the dark. Ada sat quietly, listening, her eyes filling with tears. But she didn't interrupt. The children, though too young to grasp every detail, knew this moment was important. For the first time, they all carried the burden together. That day marked the beginning of their climb out of the pit. The plan wasn't glamorous, but it was theirs. Chike took on extra shifts at work, sometimes coming home so late that the children were already asleep. Ada started selling homemade snacks, meat pies, huff puff, chin-chin right outside their gate. At first, she was embarrassed, worried that the neighbors would mock her. But over time she realized something powerful: survival leaves no room for pride. The children, too, played their part. They stopped asking for new shoes or fancy toys. Instead, they helped their mother after school, packaging snacks, carrying trays, or running small errands. They understood, in their own way, that every little bit helped. Life became a discipline. No eating out, no unnecessary spending. Every coin was accounted for. Their home transformed into a place of sacrifice, but also of determination. And strangely, in that season of lack, they discovered a new kind of strength. Month by month, debt by debt, they began to chip away at the mountain. Each time they cleared one, no matter how small, they celebrated. Sometimes it was with a special meal, other times with laughter around the kerosene lamp when NEPA took the light. The victories were small, but each one reminded them that progress was possible. The road was long, years, not months. There were times when exhaustion made them want to give up, times when Ada's hands ached from kneading dough, when Chike's body threatened to collapse from overwork. But whenever despair crept in, they reminded themselves of that night, the night they almost broke apart, and they refused to go back there. Slowly, their home changed again. The silence of secrets gave way to open conversations. The weight of shame lifted, replaced by a quiet pride in their resilience. Even the children, young as they were, carried the lesson deep in their hearts. Problems don't disappear by hiding them. They shrink when faced together. And then, one day, it happened. The last payment was made, the final receipt collected. The mountain of debt that had once seemed unshakable was gone. Just like that, the family stood free. The celebration wasn't grand, no parties, no feasts, but it was heartfelt. They gathered in their living room, held hands, and thanked God for seeing them through. Ada's smile, once dimmed by months of worrying, shone again. Chike, who had walked with bowed shoulders for so long, stood tall. And the children, their eyes wide with joy, knew that they had survived something extraordinary. But perhaps the greatest victory wasn't the freedom from debt. It was the lesson carved into their souls. They had learned the power of unity, the strength of communication, and the importance of humility. They had discovered that wealth isn't measured only in money, but in the bonds that hold a family together. From that day, they never kept secrets about money again. Every expense, every plan, every challenge was shared openly. The family meetings became a tradition, a symbol of the transparency they had earned through struggle. Years later, when the children grew older and faced their own challenges, They carried those lessons with them. They remembered how their parents had fought, not against each other, but alongside each other. They remembered that even in the darkest times, there is always a way forward when hearts remain united. And so, the story of this family became more than just a memory. It became a lesson for others, a reminder whispered from one household to another. Sometimes it's not the size of the problem that matters, but how you face it. Even a small debt can break a home, but only if you face it alone. At the end of it all, their journey stood as proof of something simple yet profound. No matter how heavy the burden, no matter how dark the night, there is no challenge too big for a family that stands together. And that, dear listener, is why stories like this matter, because they are not just about one family, but about all of us. They remind us of our struggles, our resilience, and our ability to rise again. If you've been touched by this story, then you'll find many more just like it here on Afri-Vibe Stories. Real tales, raw truths, and everyday experiences that reflect the lives of Africans everywhere. So don't just stop here, make sure you explore more stories, share them with others, and stay with us as we continue to give voice to the struggles and triumphs that shape who we are.